Good morning, Victor Elementary School District. My name is Sherry Colgan Stone, and I will be conducting the emergency EOC exercise that we will be conducting on Thursday, October 24th. This is a training to help you operate in the Emergency Operations Center. I will be going through some general slides, which I recommend everybody watch. And then I will be going into the different positions and what they're going to be doing. Not going to be going in depth because you have your position guides, but I will be providing you with at least some guidance. If you want to watch the first general slides, and then you can skip to the slides that are about what section you will be working in, that would be fine, or you can watch the entire thing. So the incident command system is a standardized on-scene and in the Emergency Operations Center all hazard management system. And it is based on common business principles. We're not going to go into depth on that, but I would recommend that you take FEMA's class on the incident command system if you have time. It takes about an hour to 2 hours to go through. It is a good class if you are interested in finding out more about this. It can be adapted to used in the Emergency Operations Center, a Department Operations Center. So a lot of counties have departments, and those departments sometimes have a Department Operations Center. So like San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office has a Department Operations Center within the county, and then the county has an Emergency Operations Center. And it can also, of course, be used at the Incident Command Post, which for our purposes, when we talk about incident command posts, those are the schools. So we're at the district office, we're going to be working at the Emergency Operations Center, but the schools are operating an incident command post because they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones doing the search and rescue, the reunification, the medical first aid. We at the Emergency Operations Center are supporting them. This system really allows for us to expand and contract as the incident occurs. And so if we need 10 people for the Emergency Operations Center or the Incident Command System, we'll use the 10 people. If we don't, then we will use 2 people. We'll use 5 people, whatever the incident basically demands of us. And then the other thing to tell you is that if we don't need a certain section, we're not going to implement it. If we don't find that we need a reunification coordinator at the Emergency Operations Center, we don't activate that position. And that person could be used to support somewhere else. So some basic components of incident command system is that we use common terminology. We only use acronyms and codes if they are inherent in the incident command system. So let me give you an example. If I said, this is go see the IC, what I'm saying is go see the incident commander. That's an abbreviation or an acronym that is inherent in the incident command system. But we use a lot of acronyms in education, and there's a lot of acronyms that are used in law enforcement and fire. And so if we start crossing those acronyms, sometimes they mean something completely different, a different system. So for example, we use the terminology of ADA in the school systems, and ADA to us means average daily attendance. If I talk to somebody in a county or city system, they'll believe that ADA means the American with Disabilities Act. So we have to be really careful, and we use common terminology, so plain speak. Then it's a modular organization. You'll see that when I show you the organization chart. There's management by objectives. We're really good about this in education, right? We're able to write objectives. So for an Emergency Operations Center, it might be we need to get this school support for their reunification. We need to send a team to help support them for reunification, or we need to make sure that we get lights on the field at this school by 5 o'clock so that if there's students left there, they can continue operations. It's writing these objectives and then meeting those objectives. And they can be broad or they can be pretty specific. And then we rely on an incident action plan. So an incident action plan It includes those objectives, but it also includes things like safety procedures, etc. And there is a form that is actually used, and that is completed by the Planning and Intel section. And so make sure if you're from the Planning and Intel section, you take a look at that. We use chain of command and unity of command. Chain of command means that you respond from the top down, so you're responding to your leader in the chain of command, and you're only taking direction from that one leader. And that is what unity of command means, is that you are only taking direction from one person. You cannot take direction from multiple people. You can get information and exchange information from multiple people, but if somebody gives you a directive, you need to make sure that you clear that with your direct leader. And then unified command is when we have other agencies on the incident. So if we had fire and law enforcement, unified command means that we would actually set up a unified command where, like I work for a sheriff's office, and so recently we had a large event here, and we had a unified command of the FBI, the Secret Service, the sheriff's office, the CHP. So all of these individuals came together, and we had one primary lead, and then all of our objectives were unified, and we were able to complete those objectives. So manageable span of control means that we have no less than 3 people work under us at any given point and no more than 7. And that's just so we can keep track of people better. We have pre-designated incident locations. Like I already mentioned, we have the Emergency Operations Center. We have the Incident Command Post. We also have things like staging areas and stuff that are a little bit more sophisticated and usually used on large-scale fires, etc. But those are inherent in the incident command system. We have resource management. We have to keep track of all those resources that we have. And so that is part of what one unit will be doing, is resource management, is making sure that we're keeping track of the people that we have out there. We're keeping track of any equipment and supplies that we have out there so we can get those back, and also making sure that we're documenting when the equipment is run, etc., so that we can get reimbursed from FEMA. And then there's transfer of command, and that is that if somebody has to leave for any time period, or if they are leaving after their shift, that there is an actual transfer of command that takes place. And usually the transfer of command requires about a half an hour leadway so that the new individual can come in and get a briefing, and then the command is transferred to them at the end of the briefing period. We're always flexible. If something isn't working, we can renegotiate it. And that means that if we find in this exercise that something did not work as far as where different personnel were placed, it's something that we can change. So this is a basic incident command structure. We have the command at the top, and those are the decision makers. And then we have these 4 sections, and you'll see these 4 sections repeated again in this presentation because each one of you most likely follows under one of these 5 components. So we have operations, who are the doers. And in the Emergency Operations Center, they are helping the boots on the ground. They are the ones who are working with the school sites the most, making sure that the health and welfare is taken care of, making sure that any special needs are taken care of, making sure that there's reunification in process. So they're the ones who are working with the schools most often. If you have anybody taking reports from on a radio, most likely the operations section is taking in those calls from the schools to document them and then feed them to the other sections as needed. Planning and Intel, these are the planners and the thinkers. They are the ones who are gathering information. They're the ones who have all the charts and graphs. We really encourage you to use maps and charts and graphs either on a computer that is fed to a monitor or fed to an LCD projector or something so everybody can see, or a hard chart, that's fine too. Butcher paper works just as well. Then we have the logistics section. Logistics section are the ones who are getting the resources and making sure the resources are deployed to where they need to get to. And they're getting that information from the operations section, and also the planning and intel section is, where do we need the resources? Where should the resources stage before they are are activated or mobilized. So they're getting these resources and then they're planning where they're going to be at each given moment, and they're keeping track of that. Then we have the finance and admin, and these are the payers and the keepers. They're the ones who track all the related costs. They're the ones who are planning for any workers' compensation, any FEMA reimbursement pieces, all of that. They're also the ones who keep this until the end of time, because FEMA loves to come back and the state loves to come back and say, hey, 10 years ago you had this incident and X, Y, and Z happened. We want to see the documentation for Z. So make sure that the finance and admin section are keeping any documentations for any incidents for eternity, basically. This is the EOC organizational chart that you will be using. And so you have the EOC director with the command staff at the top, the PIO, the liaison, and the safety officer, and then underneath them, the operations, logistics, planning, and intel, and finance and admin section. You see this other position called the EOC coordinator. They're kind of removed from the actual incident in itself. They are more of the individual who's making sure that the emergency operations center is operating to function. They're the ones who kind of understand the incident command system and can guide people in the emergency operations center who don't really work in this world every single day, right? Because we understand that you don't really work in this world. So that EOC coordinator is kind of this position who's just making sure that the EOC is operating correctly. And then we'll go over each one of these sections. So I always call the Emergency Operations Center the room where it happens. And there's a reason for that. It's because a lot of times you'll see an incident on TV and people are saying, well, they're not doing anything. The county isn't doing anything. The city isn't doing anything. Well, there's a lot being done that most people don't see, and a lot of it's being done in the Emergency Operations Center. It's that room that nobody goes into. The media is not allowed in there for the most part. And so people don't see that there are people working behind the scenes. They may not be on scene. They're at the Emergency Operations Center managing what gets done and what happens. And so when we talk about the Emergency Operations Center, people may not see you at the school site, and that's because our goal is to build the school site personnel so that they can respond, so we can help all of the schools instead of like sending all of our resources to one school and then another school, something else happens, and now we don't have any resources to send them. We need to stay at the Emergency Operations Center. And I know that our drive is to go, we need to get out to the schools and help the schools. Well, great. That's fine, but we need leadership at the EOC to be coordinating where all those resources go. So it's good to have a bank of people that isn't being used in the Emergency Operations Center that could be sent out to support reunification and all of that, so that the emergency operations staff can support from afar, make sure that everybody is getting the resources and that we're putting our priorities where the priorities need to go. And I love this quote, where uncomfortable officials meet in unaccustomed surroundings to play unfamiliar roles, making unpopular decisions based on inadequate information in much too little time. Because this tends to be, especially when there's a dynamic incident, this tends to be what you kind of feel like if you don't work in emergencies all the time and you have to work in the Emergency Operations Center. You'll feel this probably on Thursday when we have the exercise. But I just need you to know that this is a common feeling amongst people who work in the Emergency Operations Center. So the Emergency Operations Center, it is a physical location. It's staffed with personnel trained, and that's why we're training you. Be authorized to work on behalf of your agency, right, or your discipline. And it is managed through protocols and procedures, and it's applicable at all different levels of government. We can use this at the city. We can use this at the county. This is where interdepartmental coordination takes place. So how are you operating as an entire school district? It's where you're making the decisions. You're looking at the priorities. If we have a large-scale earthquake, you don't want to be sending a ton of people to one school that has 5 broken legs when you have 10 people trapped in another school. Broken legs can be fixed. If we have some people trapped in another school, that's where we want to set our priorities. So the school that's complaining because they have 2 broken arms and aren't getting any help doesn't maybe understand that over here we have people trapped under a building. This is where we collect information, we manage those resources like I just spoke about, and then we also coordinate with external agencies and partners like law enforcement, cities, etc. It's to support that on-scene response, right, at the schools. We want to support them. So we acquire resources as we can, we allocate those, we track those resources, and then we manage and share information. Maybe it's towards the end of a day and it's about 5 o'clock, and we've got 2 schools that have 30 students at each school left over. Well, maybe we don't want, and they're close to each other, maybe a half a mile apart. Maybe we want to walk the 30 students from one school over to another school so that we don't have to staff 2 schools, right? And then notify parents, put messages up at this one school, hey, all of your students have been moved to this school. This is where we manage and share information. We manage and share information with city and county and other jurisdiction partners. And then we, of course, establish our priorities and our objectives, as I said. We also support our community by providing that critical public information. Hey, we've moved all of these students to this school. You need to pick up your students here, or the schools will be closed for a week, whatever that information is. And then we start establishing our recovery priorities based on the needs of the community, right? It may be, one school has been completely demolished, and so we have to utilize another school, and we have an AM/PM schedule, and so that's one of our priorities. It's to identify any financial needs so that we can feed those to our city and our county so that they can apply for us to get reimbursement. And then it's that painting of the new normal for the entire community as needed. In the incident command post, these are your schools. Each school has an incident commander, and they oversee all the incident operations. They will probably set up a command post there. This is where the incident command post, the schools, this is where the direct field responses are taking place. They are the ones who can see the incident. So they can see the school. They know what's going on at the schools. They know which buildings need to be searched. They know people who need to get first aid. You at the Emergency Operations Center, you will have kind of an overall picture. You can't be directing, hey, you need to go into building A and search building A because you're not there. You're supporting them. If they need hard hats, the Emergency Operations Center is trying to find those hard hats and get them to the incident command post so that they can conduct that search. You are doing the overall kind of coordination piece, and they are directing the response there. In emergencies, we operate under what's called a tiered response, and that is that we handle the incident at the lowest jurisdiction level. We don't have the superintendent of the school district serving food to the students in the cafeteria every day, but the superintendent manages all of that. And there is kind of this trickle effect that if something happens, let's say there is a problem with the food that is being served, the cafeteria worker would probably then report it to their supervisor, and their supervisor would report it to the principal. If the principal can't handle it, then they would call up to the district office. That's the exact same process that we use in emergencies. So we try to handle the incident at the lowest jurisdictional level. If we can't handle it, that's when we go a step up. So for schools, it would be the school will be calling the Emergency Operations Center. If the district emergency operations center can't handle it, they might go to the city. The city can't handle it, they would go to the county. If the county can't handle it, they go to the state. And if the state can't handle it, they would go to FEMA. So it just kind of trickles up that way. And that is why it's so important that we train our schools to respond. So this is kind of an example of how information comes and goes. Each of the schools to be providing information to the district, and then we want the district EOC to be also then providing information back to the schools. Okay, let's talk about the different positions. You can skip ahead to the section that you are going to be working in. However, I do recommend that you listen to this entire spiel just so that you understand what other people's roles are. You do have your position guides that are going to be available to you, so you can use those. So this is just kind of a recap, and it's not going to be a in-depth description of each one of these positions, but at least it will help you kind of understand what people will be working on. So the Emergency Operations Center Director is the individual who is in control of the entire system. They are the ones who are establishing the incident priorities and objectives. They are doing this because they're receiving information from individuals in the command, and they're able to make those decisions based on the direction of the district priorities and, of course, the incident priorities. But they rely heavily on what is being pushed up to them. So it is critical that we follow the incident command system so that information receives that person so they can make a better decision. They conduct any emergency operations center briefings. They may halt operations for a bit and say, this is what's going on. I need you to, this section to work on this. I need this section to work on this. And they're able to do that at any given point. There are, of course, points that will be beneficial for them to do that, but sometimes that needs to happen just to make sure that all the priorities are being addressed and that they're also getting all of the information. So they also might bring all the section chiefs up just to get a quick overview of what's been happening in each section. And then those section chiefs would come back to the section and report back. They review and, of course, approve the incident action plan for each operational period. So consider an operational period basically a shift. So each shift or operational period should have an incident action plan or a continuation of the action plan with updated objectives and priorities. They approve any and review any resource requests that are pretty substantial. Of course, they don't have to review and approve every pencil that's handed out or things like that. But, if you need a dozer or a scraper at a school site, they're probably going to need to approve that type of thing. They coordinate with the safety officer to make sure that everything is safe. They may have an ad hoc deputy to help them keep track of everything, and so that ad hoc could also take command at another point if the EOC director had to leave. And then if the positions have not been activated, of course, they will serve as the liaison officer, the safety officer, and the PIO, and any other of the section chiefs that have not been activated. So if a position under you has not been activated, then you have to obtain that role. You have to complete that role. There is the safety officer, and we call this individual the watchdog. And I'm sorry, you can barely see that in the bottom right-hand corner there, but we consider this individual the watchdog. And they identify and mitigate those hazardous situations. They identify things that might go wrong, such as in an earthquake, right? It may not be the initial earthquake that causes damage. It could be fires that are causing damage, or there might be a gas leak and that could cause some damage. So they're identifying those things. And at the Emergency Operations Center, not only are they kind of in charge of the whole safety operation for everything that's going on, making sure that they're getting briefings about what's going on at the school so that they can help with safety at the school, they're also in charge of safety in the Emergency Operations Center, making sure cords aren't going across so that you're going to trip over cords, etc. They make sure that safety messages and briefings are made and held. They along with the Emergency Operations Center, emergency operations director are the only two people who can halt the entire operation and to say everything has to shut down because we have to move our emergency operations center. We have a hazardous material spill or fumes coming our way. We need to move the emergency operations center. So they can stop the operations because of safety. They review the incident action plan. They actually provide the safety briefing in the incident action plan and then review it for any other safety implications. And they participate in planned meetings, etc. The public information officer, we call them the speaker. They may not be the person getting in front of a camera, but they're at least writing the talking points for whoever is going to get in front of a camera. So they're the ones who make sure that they're looking at all the information that is released to the public, released to the school sites. Not every single piece of information, but any kind of policy directives, all of that going to the school sites. If you need to go, hey, school, you need to be ready to accept 20 hard hats that somebody's going to deliver them. This is where they're going to deliver them. That kind of information doesn't need to go to the public information officer. But what does need to is any sort of policy or directives from the Emergency Operations Center director. They obtain any EOC director's approval for any news releases. They're going to be, setting up any media briefings. They are going to be the ones who make sure that the media is separated far away from the rest of the operations so that the media is not disrupting operations. If there are any PIOs, not PIOs, excuse me, VIPs who want to have a tour of the Emergency Operations Center, which we don't recommend, because it really halts all the operations, they would be the ones who would arrange for tours or any interviews, etc. They participate in planned meetings. They're managing and searching mass notification systems and social media channels to make sure that messages are being put out properly and to quelch any rumors. The liaison officer, they act as that link between the district and other agencies who might be responding. So if the Red Cross is at a site, they're going to be the liaison between the Red Cross and the district. If law enforcement or fire, they would be that liaison. If Unified Command hasn't been set up, then they are the liaison between the partnering agencies, right? And they monitor the incident. They're feeding information to the other partnering agencies from our district and then collecting information from the partnering agencies and feeding it back to the district. So the EOC coordinator is the one who coordinates the initial setup of the Emergency Operations Center. It's actually the logistics section who is setting it up, but the EOC coordinator will coordinate them setting it up. And then they provide that general guidance for all of the EOC staff and how to kind of function as an emergency operations center. They understand emergency management. They understand the incident command system, the National Incident Management System, the Standardized Emergency Management System, all those systems that we use in emergency management so they can better guide the staff in the EOC on how to operate. The finance and admin section, they negotiate and execute all emergency contracts. They will track personnel and equipment time, so they have a lot of spreadsheets going usually, and there are some examples of spreadsheets that you can utilize. You don't have to use those. You can utilize something that you use on a day-to-day basis, and that's fine. But it is important to track people's time and equipment time. And of course, if there's equipment that uses an operator, as if the equipment is operating, the time for the operator needs to be recorded as well, right? So all of that needs to be coordinated by the finance and admin section. They're looking at cost analysis if the Emergency Operations Center director or the superintendent, if that is not the EOC director, wants to know, hey, how much is this going to cost us? They're looking at cost analysis. They're looking at compensation for any injuries. We're doing all the workers' compensation pieces. They are looking for multiple sources of funds and tracking accrued costs as the incident progresses. And then, of course, they'll lead the FEMA documentation process if there is a reimbursement piece to it. The chief of finance and admin section, they are going to oversee everything that happens. They will be the one who prepares a post-incident final report and submits that post-disaster cost recovery paperwork. This is more on the section chief, the finance and admin section chief. Just make sure that your units are established for the incident and that you review all the fiscal issues related to the incident. Ensure that the units are carrying out their assigned duties, conduct briefings with the EOC director, and then prepare those final reports as mentioned earlier. So purchasing, cost accounting, and recovery unit, you're going to be doing all of these things if you're in this unit. Purchasing items, working extremely closely with the logistics section to make sure those items that they need are being purchased and that you have vendors set up for them. Cost accounting, you're collecting that cost information, performing cost benefit analysis, and providing cost estimates to the EOC director and leadership, documenting any overtime and documenting for personnel records. The recovery unit, you're determining the impact on the emergency for fiscal planning, right? And making sure that all of the paperwork that is going to be needed by FEMA is documented. You're going to keep all of that information in your unit and for eternity, as I said earlier, making sure that you develop that strategy from recovery planning also to a wider post-emergency recovery effort. So once the Emergency Operations Center is no longer open, but there's still fiscal needs from that emergency coming in from the school sites, you're going to need to kind of conduct that transition as well. Compensation and claims. This is the unit that is going to be working on any property claims, any workers' compensation claims, and completing that documentation. Then we have the planning and intel section. And again, these are the planners and the thinkers, right? They're collecting information and dispersing information as it is collected. They're the ones with all of the charts. They might have a chart with all of the schools listed that have, how many are injured, how many buildings are damaged, all of that. They may have all that organized on walls or on LCD projectors. They prepare the incident action plan. And that is an actual document that it's a form that you'll be provided. So making sure that that's done, working with the EOC director to complete that and getting those priorities and objectives put into it. They're predicting the probable course of incidents, right? You're working with the safety officer to think about any different types of hazards that may pop up because of an earthquake, that type of thing. And then maintain a lot of the incident documentation about what is happening on the ground. So the fiscal part, the finance and admin section, is going to be documenting a lot of the fiscal part, but you're going to be documenting kind of the core pieces of information of what's going on. It's really important that you keep what's called an activity log form going and that you have a really good idea of what's happening with each of the sections. So working very closely with each of the sections to document that. The planning and intel section chief basically is responsible for determining the scope of the emergency and any potential developments, what's going on, working with the team, working with the other sections to gather that information, put that information in some way that it is conducive to the entire Emergency Operations Center, working on the action plan and completing that action plan with the assistance of other section chiefs, and then just basically monitoring the entire situation. Make sure that your situation analysis unit and your documentation unit, of course, are staffed if you need them. Again, only staff those things that you need. Kind of develop a situational awareness of the emergency to be posted on display boards or LCD projectors. Working with the EOC director and other personnel to gain that situational awareness, develop that action plan, or you're coordinating the development of that action plan, and ensure the documentation unit is gathering and maintaining all the records associated, like the sign-in sheets, the position logs, copy of status boards, all of that from the different incident command posts or school sites, and also internally. And then you'll be handing all of that documentation over to the finance and admin section chief when the incident is done and the EOC is deactivated. Um, and then the situational analysis unit, they're the ones who are kind of organizing all that information, collecting it, processing it, and organizing it in a way that is conducive for the entire EOC to view it, for reports, and for those situation summaries. You might be developing those projections and forecasts of future events related to the incident. So what might happen? Well, at some point, we're not going to have parents picking kids up anymore because they're, trapped in the cone pass or wherever they're trapped, and so they're not coming. So we need to foresee that we may have to house these kids overnight, and so mentioning that in a briefing, you're looking and planning ahead for the next 3 weeks. Okay, we're going to have, we already know we have one deceased or several critically injured. We're probably going to have some critical incident stress debriefing or psychological first aid counseling set up. So how are we going to do that in the coming weeks? Thinking about continuity of education. How are we going to start restoring the education? You're thinking of all of those things and starting to plan. And then the documentation unit, they are the ones who are making sure that everything is accurately documented for the incident. If you need to provide duplication services, copies for people, making copies of things, maintaining the store incident files for legal and analytical and historical purposes. And really, this unit can work very closely with the situational analysis unit. It sometimes becomes really one big section because you're kind of doing a lot of the same things, but you're the ones who are making sure that those incident files are accurate and a record of the district's response is completed as well. The operations section is responsible for coordinating all incident tactical operations, not conducting the tactical operations. Remember, the tactical operations are being done on the boots on the ground at the school sites. What you're going to be coordinating is what is going on at the school sites. So you'll be collecting that information from the school sites, feeding it to where it needs to go, and then helping those schools with whatever they need to be helped with. So if that's reunification, that's health and welfare type of thing. If it's with facilities, so you're going to work with logistics, you're going to work with the other sections to get the schools what they need. And then you'll have parts of the incident action plan, right? You are going to be the ones who are implementing what's in that incident action plan. So making sure all of those things do get done. You're requesting any additional incident resources from logistics, and then monitoring resources and making sure that when you demobilize, you're going to probably have a lot of the resources in your section and making sure you have a demobilization plan to let them all leave. The operations section chief is responsible for carrying out the Emergency Operations Center Incident Action Plan. This includes coordination with field staff and with public agencies. You're notifying the planning and intel section of any situational changes, and then you're advising the logistics section of any resources that they need. And here again is the operations section chief job. And I've gone over most of this, but continue to brief the EOC director and the planning and intel section chief on the status of operations section and ensure that all the objectives are completed because you will have the most objectives. So within the operations section, we have the special needs services unit. And these are the individuals who are going to be concentrating on providing services for special needs. Any individuals with functional or access needs can't, any people in wheelchair, well, how are we going to evacuate them if we need to evacuate them? What about the medications that they need, that type of thing. So the health and welfare unit is kind of that all-encompassing, shelter operations, public health operations. This is where the medical and first aid teams will be reaching out to you to get guidance if there's any sort of health issues going on, if there's a public health emergency. You're going to be busy. You're looking at arranging for any sheltering facilities, staff resources that are needed on sites, transportation needs, etc., for any health and welfare issues. Parent reunification unit. This is if a reunification needs to take place at one or multiple schools. You're helping to support that reunification process in a large scale incident where it's mass casualty, violent event. This unit will be extremely busy. If it's an event where reunification doesn't need to take place, you may not need to activate this unit. If you have a district reunification team, that they are mobilized to the right places to go to help with that reunification process. If you don't have a parent reunification team, you're lining up resources, trying to find volunteers or other district staff to go and help them, or to get the logistical resources, equipment, paper, that type of thing. If they're unable to obtain that because, there was a fire at the school or something and they can't go back into the school, then you may need to drum up those resources for them. Crisis counseling unit. This is the unit that will be thinking and planning ahead for any crisis counseling that needs to take place. Usually, you should do a debriefing at the end of any shift with the individuals who are involved in the recovery efforts, the response efforts, the emergency operations center efforts. There should be some sort of debriefing, so planning for those, and then planning for long-term crisis counseling as well. The logistics section, again, are the getters. They're the ones who are trying to get the resources, or if they don't have those resources, they're working with the finance and admin section to contract with a vendor to make sure you're getting those resources. They're the ones in charge of like food, shelter, and communications, identifying the status of available resources. So where have we put our resources, whether that be people or equipment, and then developing a communications plan as well. The logistics section chief is ensuring that the resource needs of the emergency are met, and this will include facilities, transportation, materials, supplies, food, personnel, and all other services. Make sure that all the units are activated if you're the chief, and then coordinate procurement with the finance and admin section chief, because that's going to be important. You're going to need those contracts. You're going to need to know what your limits are, what you can and cannot purchase at this point, and then continue to keep the EOC director briefed. There's a unit called the Construction, Engineering, and Facilities Unit, and they make sure that there are adequate facilities for the response, making sure that there's access to facilities, providing any staff, furniture, supplies, materials necessary to configure the facilities in a manner which is basically adequate to accomplish our mission of educating children, ensuring that buildings or any district property are returned to their original state, coordinating all structural and infrastructure related activities during the emergency. So they're in charge of those utilities, right? The public works pieces, engineering, all of that. The supply and procurement unit, they arrange for any needed equipment, materials, supplies, food, and drinks, right? Getting all of those supplies, working really closely with finance and admin to get those, coordinating vendor contracts that are not previously addressed by existing approved vendors, and then coordinating on all matters that need to exceed established purchase order limits. So if we have to order items that are above the approved limits in the board policy, then we need to kind of work with those, and this group is the one working with finance and admin on that. So the transportation unit arranges for transportation needs associated with all EOC operations. This could include resources, supplies, and or people, and then coordinate transportation needs of the school sites. Personnel unit arranges for any additional personnel needs. So you're going to need to work closely with the operations section to see what's needed at each of the school sites. They're tracking and recording and reporting all on duty personnel so that we can make sure that they get paid, make sure that they check out if they checked in, to make sure that we don't lose anybody, ensure that all travel expenses are documented so that we can compensate individuals. Resource management, you're coordinating with all the other units to capture and centralize those resources that are out there and making sure that you kind of keep a logistics board. If you have equipment, if you have buses, etc., that's out there, you need to make sure that you're logging all of that information and keeping track of it, keeping track of how many miles the equipment is going, making sure you're providing finance and admin with the costs to operate that equipment. The communications unit will work very closely with the information systems unit, and it can also kind of be ran as one unit if necessary. If you don't have the personnel, they're the ones who make sure that all the communications in the EOC are working, whether that be telephone, fax, internet, radio communications, all of that needs to be working, and then also coordinate any communications between the EOC and on-site personnel. The information systems unit likewise needs to make sure that the internet and the network communications are working, and everything is coordinating between the EOC and the on-scene personnel as well. I mentioned earlier, it's really important that as an emergency operations center, you're not stagnant. You're not just sitting at your desk, not talking to people. An EOC is a very busy place, and people are getting up and walking around. There are charts on the walls. People are going to review the charts. This is kind of an example. It kind of shows you how step by step you might handle a resource request. So if something comes in and there's a request for a resource, who all is involved in that? Because it's not just you. So you might get a piece of information that doesn't pertain to you, and you might be the only person who receives that information. It's important for you to know that that piece of information might be important to somebody else. So you can't just set it aside. You may need to get it to somebody else. If a resource request is received, then use your standard procurement procedures whenever possible, but to request non-standard response needs. So the field, the incident command post, of course, would send the request to the operations section. So a school site would request that from the operations section. Hey, we need X, Y, and Z. And then the operations section is going to coordinate with logistics. And then logistics will work with finance and admin to secure the funding. Then the EOC director would approve or deny the request based, of course, if it's limit that they say. So the EOC director might say, hey, anything above $10,000, I need to approve coming out. Anything below that, I don't need to approve. So whatever the EOC director says at that point, of course, it has to be below the board policy limits, but they give us that number. And then anything above that, they would need to approve. And then the planning section would track the approval and the denial. And then the logistics section coordinates with operations section to procure and deploy the resource. So I'm going to provide you with a link to the Google Drive. And in that Google Drive, there are some incident command system forms. We will go over these forms really quickly the morning of the exercise, but it will be like the incident action plan, the activity log. There's some spreadsheets in there. If you're in the finance and admin section, of course, you're going to want to have copies of those spreadsheets on your computer or whatever spreadsheets you would want to use to document things. So take a look at those incident command forms so that you're ready. A couple of things about the exercise itself. Number one, come prepared with your laptops, with your phones, with your devices, because you will probably use any and all of those things in the exercise. When you show up, you're going to need to sign in because when you enter the Emergency Operations Center, they need to know that you're there. And so you'll sign in just like you're coming into the Emergency Operations Center. So please do that. It is going to be a low stress, and I'm saying low stress, it's going to be a low stress exercise. However, I understand that this is probably your first time in an Emergency Operations Center exercise. What is going to happen is you are going to have what we call injects. You're going to have things coming in to you. And those things can come in a variety of ways. They might be a note that is handed by me to you, and you need to go through it, read it, and determine how you're going to handle it. And then there's also, it could be a phone call. You could be receiving a phone call. You could be receiving an email. You could be receiving a radio call from one of the schools. So it depends on the incident, but you're going to be receiving different injects, and you have to kind of respond to them, and you have to share that information with those people who you think it needs to be shared with. Now, I will tell you that the first time most organizations go through an exercise, you're going to come up with a lot of lessons learned. And just so you know, every single school district or every single organization, no matter if they're experienced or not, every single time they go through an exercise, there are always lessons learned. So please don't get discouraged. I am going to be acting not only as the facilitator and the controller, but also a mentor, if you will. So if you have questions on like, hey, I'm really lost. I don't know what to do at this point. What do I do with this piece of information, or how should I handle this? Please do not feel like you can't come up and ask me. It is possible that I may have a co-facilitator with me, and of course, they will also serve as a mentor if they are there. And do not feel at all like we're judging, that we're there to help you be successful. And you will be successful in many different ways, and you'll also have plenty of lessons learned. So bring your devices, come ready to have fun, and don't stress too much about it. Just try to take it all in, review the PowerPoint, review this video, review your position guides, review the forms, and you'll be ready to rock on Thursday. I mentioned earlier that there's trainings that you can take online. You can take Introduction to the Incident Command System, which is called IS 700. You can also take the National Incident Management System, and both of those are available on the FEMA website. And there's tons of other trainings that you can take on that website. It can be a little overwhelming, but if you're really into this, I highly recommend that you take a look at all the free training that you can take. It is absolutely free. You get a certificate at the end. And last but not least, I'll see you in the room where it happens.